What is up, guys? The Strong Boys 19 here, and welcome to part 3 of the Slipknot dedicated album review series in honor of Joey Jordison. And I have two special guests with me for this collab review, RichardMetalFan and SeditionThroughScorns. So, greetings, gentlemen. So, the three of us are going to be doing an album review on the second studio album with Slipknot, entitled Iowa. Now, this album was released on the 28th of August in 2001. It is the follow-up to their self-titled debut record in 1999, follow-up to their critical acclaim that they have achieved from the first record, doing extensive tours. And this is the second album to be produced by the maestro that is Ross Robinson, who I credited him previously as my favorite producer that Slipknot had worked with in terms of any of the other producers later on in their career. This was recorded at Sound City Studios in Los Angeles, released to Roadrunner Records, and this is 66 minutes of its entirety. After the success of the first album and the extensive touring, a lot of the band members have been taking a really long break after their massive hard graft. But the two members that were really ready to start the making of this album were Joey and Paul Gray, the band's bassist. However, mentally, emotionally, physically, this was at their very worst personal-wise, because there was so much destruction and the hatred towards each of the band, and a lot of chaos was going on surrounding the making of the record. And I won't go on too long about it, because there was a really in-depth, lengthy article about the background of the making of the album on loudersound.com, which I will provide a link in the description below. But needless to say, things behind the scenes of the album were just incredibly intense and not as easy at all. And as Sean Clown Crahan, I may quote, "Recording Iowa was fucking hell. I wanted to kill myself. There was drugs, bitches, rock and roll, all that shit. People expected so much of us then. People equals shit was our way of saying, fuck off, leave us alone. There was nothing happy about Iowa," according to Corey Taylor. And again, I may quote, "All of a sudden, we were these metal stars, and we weren't really planning for it. We'd all got caught up in the lifestyle and producers that came with that. A darkness set in at the beginning of Iowa that none of us quite recognized." And Joey Jordison did say Iowa, even more than the first record, was the album we really wanted to make. Also, this is the first album to credit Jim Root, because Josh Brainard was with Slipknot for the making and the majority of that album, but Jim Root, now being the last member in the classic lineup of Slipknots to join, was with the making of this album. There's a lot of that intensity and the vibe that the first album really took, but I believe that Iowa definitely amplifies so much more of the darkness and just the visceral, violent atmosphere that the first album did get, but I find Iowa to really amplify things of that aggression so much. So a lot of the lyricism onto the album, a lot of the lyrics written by Corey Taylor, pretty much on a similar vein like the first record. However, Corey was just going into such a catastrophic, chaotic, and a ballistic variety of everything in his mind. Strong usages of metaphors, misanthropy, disgust, the hatred of humanity, psychosis, and rejection. There's just so much of that perfectly makes Iowa even bigger of a heavier album, and arguably enough for many Slipknot fans to cite Iowa as the best and heaviest Slipknot album, and it went to #1 in the UK for the first time when it came out, both the UK albums and rock and metal albums charts, and it went to #1 in Canada. And when the album received critical success, it won a platinum certification in America as well as Canada, and it did go up gold from Belgium and Britain. So, guys, what do you personally think about the album?
Well, for me, Iowa is, like I said, my all-time favorite Slipknot album. It's their best to date, and it's crazy that this album is getting close to almost 20 years old. Like the 28th will be 20 years since the album has been released. And still to this day, it's from the beginning to end. It's like compared to like the first album and to Iowa, I feel like has a lot more death metal influence compared there. It sounds a lot more brutal. It sounds really thick and just aggressive sounding. Not to call I wouldn't necessarily call Slipknot a death metal band, but they have like the death metal elements on Iowa there, and just that whole album is great. The things I would love to have seen them when that first album came out. I would love to have been like 10 years older in 2001. That would have been sick.
Right, so what do you think about the album, Jake?
Iowa is, without question, the band's best album in terms of the lyrical content, musicality, the production. Everything about that album solidify their sound in compared to the 1999 album, which is a great debut album. But I feel like Iowa is their heaviest, darkest, most aggressive albums in 2001. And 2001 was a great year for metal because we had Tool's Lateralis, Toxicity by System of a Down, Jane Doe by Converge, and Digimoral by Fear Factory. There were so many great albums in that time period. But I think for me, Iowa was the album that not only appreciated my standards for extreme metal as a whole, because Slipknot is a gateway band to a lot of us. And coming from someone who was almost 13 years old at the time when Iowa first came out, it really became an album where it really stuck with me through and through, because I never heard anything so catastrophic, so menacing, so dark and chaotic, because the vocals from Corey Taylor was just in your face. You could feel like his pain. He feel like he was tormented to death. And it's like, when you read the lyrical content, it's like, wow, this guy has been through so much shit. So I think Iowa, to me personally, is the best Slipknot album. And I feel like even if you're not a fan of Slipknot or a fan of rock or metal in general, this album was actually listed as one of the 1001 albums you must listen to before you die. And for a good reason, too, because this record has everything that you love, that we all love about the self-titled, but turned the intensity to 100 times higher, just made it so evil and heavy. And you're just like, wow, this is Slipknot. This is when they were at their prime. This is when they were aggressive. This is when they were doing a whole bunch of shit, from the interviews and articles and just seeing live performances. I never got to see Slipknot in their prime live, but being someone who grew up listening to them, I have nothing but the most ultimate respect for Slipknot as a whole.
Indeed. So we are going to go into each of the tracks of the album, track by track. So I think the running order is that I will say my thoughts, and I will let Richard say his, and Jake, and that'll go on pretty much until the end of the review, and with our final analysis of the record as a whole. So the first track, pretty much like the similar vein as the self-titled album's introduction, this album opener 515 opens things really dark, and just so much of this disturbing atmospheric soundscapes, and with all of the darkness that Iowa surrounds itself right after the introduction, 515 just pretty much starts it all, because you hear these disturbing, unsettling, I guess, industrial soundscapes, and with the screams and the peril from Sid Wilson, because his emotional expression on this intro was just surreal. And at that time, one of his family relatives had passed away, and you can immediately hear that sheer heartbreak and just the unreal emotion from Sid's repeat of the word death all around this 1 minute introduction. And this is just as unsettling, but something even much more of a darker presence than the opening from the self-titled album.
Yeah, 515 is, I think, really much sets the whole tone for Iowa. Well, and 515 is of course like the area code in Iowa where Slipknot is from. And I remember hearing that intro. It gives me goosebumps, and I didn't even know that was like Sid Wilson, their DJ, doing the screaming. Apparently, like he was trying to visit his grandfather. He was terminally ill, and when he got there, he was already gone. And so that was how 515 really was made. And it just, to this day, it still gives me goosebumps knowing about all like the shit that Sid and Corey and pretty much the rest of Slipknot were going through at the time. And I think it's really sets the tone for what's to come for Iowa.
515 is one of those intros where you feel like you have to sink in immediately just to hear the album's presentation. And I feel like the first time I've ever heard it, I was scared to death, because if you listen to it very carefully, you can hear this industrial, like, programming synthetics where Sid Wilson, in my personal opinion, is one of my favorite members of the original 9 members. And you can just hear his cry. You can hear his emotional patterns of saying death, death. And I'm like, oh my God, like, this is about a family member that he is just witnessing it to die. And I can resonate with that too, because this intro not only creates the album to be as sinister and like very horror driven, like you're watching a slasher film where of course the main villain comes to the character and starts beating him to death and in the most intense way, but this is more of a introduction to know that, okay, what we're going to expect after the next song we're going to talk about. 515 is just as disturbing, if not one of the most eerie, haunting, and atmospheric passages to an introduction I've heard in a very long time coming from an album like this.
It really sets the vibe of what's to come right after that intro. So after 515, we go straight into the very heavy, catchy, ballistic outcry of a song of people equal shit. Just some of the most chaotic introductions from any Slipknot track. Hearing the variety of drumming patterns and blast beats to the virtuoso guitar riffage all over. And this is just straight to the point. And it was such a big, impactful number. This is just Slipknot boosting up so much energy right from the start on the verse sections with so much anger on Corey's vocal performance. And of course, with the repeated phrase of the title of the track in the chorus, which brings it so much groove to it. And I'll have to say that People Equal Shit is one of those songs that really stands true to itself as a Slipknot song, and no wonder it has been a live staple, especially after hearing the 515 intro from the Disasterpieces live concert. And when the curtains drop immediately, this is just as a ballistic number. People Equal Shit always stands out as one of my favorite Slipknot songs of all time.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Greg. Like, People Equal Shit, like right from the get-go, it just hits you in the face of a million miles an hour, just and then just like the whole band's like at 100%, and like just vocally, just Corey Taylor, like right when he yells, "Here we go again, motherfucker," and the whole band just explodes. Oh, it's right there. And especially like the vocals, like goddamn, like even just on this whole album, like Corey Taylor just sounds like one pissed off motherfucker. Like, damn, like you can hear him say "fuck it" fucking like every single song. Like, I can't even imagine how many times he said you can hear that in this album, but it's still a sick song, especially like when you hear it saying "people equal shit," that just gets you going. And especially like that little break in like the bridge breakdown with Joey doing that little drum solo, it just really showcases how good of a drummer he was. And still, like, People Equal Shit is still one of my favorite Slipknot songs.
People Equal Shit is one of the greatest Slipknot songs and one of the greatest songs on the entire album, in my personal opinion. I feel like this is one of the heaviest tracks on the album, not because of the band's growth and experimentation on how like the drums, the guitars, the samples, and the bass are performed, but vocally, I feel like this is Corey Taylor's some of his finest and most aggressive vocal patterns in the entire album's history. From the death metal inspired melodies to the industrial metal counterparts within the drums, and also has a little bit of a groove metal influences. If you listen to the guitar tones by Mick Thompson, you can definitely hear like the Latins and the structures of his melody, where it feels like it's catchy, but it has this little cool break where the guitars are driven within the bass and the drums, and it all synchronizes into this chaotic and menacing and like polarizing song where it almost feels like technical in such a way, because on the self-titled album, songs like Surfacing and Sick, those songs are technically driven as well. But People Equal Shit, on the other hand, the song in particular, it is very technical, but it's not too technical to the point you're hearing something from like, I don't know, like a Dying Fetus song where it's all about like groove and structure and all in such a way. But People Equal Shit is one of my personal favorite Slipknot songs of all time, and it's a huge fan favorite for a reason. It's a song that it's one of those songs where you feel like you're going to a gym, you're having a really bad day, and you just want to say, fuck it all, fuck this world, fuck everything you stand for. You know, this song is a representation of Slipknot saying, like, we are bringing the heaviness, we are bringing the factor, we are Slipknot, this is what we're capable of, we don't give a fuck what you say. People Equal Shit is a song that personally I could resonate to, one of my favorite songs on the entire album.
Just some of the most, as I said, straight to the point, non-stop action all the way through. So after People Equal Shit, we go into one of the highlights of the album, which is Disasterpiece. Now, out of all of these songs on the record, which we'll go to, obviously, Disasterpiece is one of my main personal favorite numbers on the album. You hear some of these unusual noises at the start from Mick's guitar, and you hear the anticipated build-up with that percussion-driven building up drumming style. And when the band goes straight into it, it was just something menacing, faster, and something as much of a memorable hook. And that's what this album really does connect with immediately. While I do cite the first album as my personal favorite, there's something about Iowa in the order of the track listing. In my opinion, a song like this, Disasterpiece, follows the album in a very consistent way, because that's what every track really does. Every track does deliver with its most consistent path. But I find Disasterpiece to have another really good violent essence, especially with the grim lyricisms, the variety onto the lyricisms, being full of the catastrophic and phenomenal direction of Kraft as a band. And I have to say, Disasterpiece works out musicianship wise. Again, like People Equal Shit, the variety with the drumming to the guitar work, and especially there's so much of this edge right from the start to the finish. It's just 5 minutes of one of their other phenomenal standout tracks. And personally, I think this would maybe be my personal favorite number on this album.
Right, and I agree with you, with some of the points you made, Greg. And Disasterpieces, I think, just just from like Mick's guitar intro and then like the percussion, I just love how it just builds up, and then when Corey yells, "Lord of I forget what he says, "Lord of the something," and then just boom, the whole band's on fire here, and it just has like sick lyrics, like with Corey saying, "I want to slit your throat and fuck the wound. I want to push my face in and fill this room." Just some of the sickest lyrics, and especially love like the little breakdown that da 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 da. I feel like that whole album's on fire, and just like every song in general, well, from like, of course we'll get into it when we get there. Well, each song has like different vibes, but it still just flows really well and consistent.
Disasterpiece to me is one of those songs that I don't listen to a lot on the entire album, but it is a damn good track, you know, from a musician standpoint of view. I feel like every member balances the instrumentation so perfectly well, especially with the bridge part before Corey starts unleashing his vocal patterns. And I feel like the more I listen to this song, Disasterpiece as a whole, the more I tend to appreciate the track even more. And what I mean by that is like the lyrical content on this album, yeah, it's a little disturbing, it's a little dark if you read the analogy on what the song is about. But I feel like everything from the guitars, the bass, the drums, the percussions, even the samples on that album are so perfectly well balanced where you can easily detect on how audible everything sounds. It sounds clear, it sounds progressive at times, not too progressive like Tool standard, but like it sounds so monolithic, as in like it's just so blissfully crafted. It's so wonderful. It's a song that I wish I could say it's my personal favorite, but unfortunately it is not. But however, Disasterpiece is a really good song, just to kind of slows the tempo down, and then the heaviness starts to break in. And I feel like this song as a whole, from a perspective point of view, I feel like it's a fan favorite and probably one of the most memorable tracks on the album.
Excellent points there, guys. And I absolutely admire just the differences onto the switchable changes into the track, especially with incorporating a bit of the melody, especially with the part where they just take things down and hear Corey go in a bit of a cleaner tone. And I absolutely do admire when this track, while it is just chaos all the way through, the bridge section, especially onto that build up, switching back into that dirgy riffing on that bridge section, was just a phenomenal, brilliant addition to make the song as really strong. And I think that it's one of the songs that is completely relevant, and what's a very prolific number at that. So after Disasterpiece, we're going to go into the track of My Plague, which I think My Plague is really where one of the vocal melodies begin to switch things round for Corey as a vocalist, because especially when Corey goes into a cleaner tone melody-wise from the first record, Corey does that quite a lot onto this record alone, because you can hear the variety and yet the really grimy, distorted, and just a brilliant improvement of vocal performances that Corey has on this whole album. My Plague, vocal-wise, is just some of his best, and especially on what a great package of some lower tuned, down tuned guitars with so much of a groove as well. Very catchy as well, with the memorable chorus. And apparently, as I have been looking this up, with the song itself, maybe you could hear a bit of Joey doing a bit of additional vocals on the New Abuse mix of the song. But My Plague, just something really, really good. And for me, it's not one of those songs that is like a powerful, edgy song like on People Equal Shit to the Heretic anthem and some songs later on. But I find that My Plague does deliver as a standout single, because that was something like, I guess, like one of the early parts on a bit of the commercial side of Slipknot. But My Plague does work out as efficiently with so much of the edginess and the tonality like on the rest of the tracks here. So one of the other really good tracks on the record.
Right. And I think My Plague definitely shows like the more melodic side of Slipknot. Like of course the first three songs were just pure aggression, and I feel like My Plague vocally just showcases the band sort of like having a little bit of melody while having sort of the aggressive moments. And and it's definitely like but it still flows well with the rest of the album itself. And the song itself is good. It was also featured in the Resident Evil soundtrack. There's the music video, which has the band playing, but also has clips of the movie from it, and it's really good. And I still haven't heard the new Abuse mix. I have no idea there was Joey doing that, but then again, I haven't heard that version. I might need to check that out. But I still think My Plague still just flows really well with what we've heard so far with the album.
My Plague is one of those songs I feel like is an underrated track in my personal opinion, especially from a vocal standpoint, because you can really detect the clean style vocals that Corey Taylor performs when it says, "I know, won't you blame me, blame yourself." I feel like he shows a lot of emotion, and he just wants you to feel like not have any sympathy for him, but he just wants to show like the listener, be like, okay, I can be an aggressive motherfucker of a vocalist, but I want to show you guys like my melancholic, my melodic, and my somewhat emotional, soothing style of vocals. And I feel like with this song in particular, I feel like this is one of the more melodic tracks. Not saying it's a bad track, it's a really good track for what it is, but coming from this sound's perspective, I feel like this is one of the more of a slower, melodically driven, also catchy at times, because I feel like as you listen to the chorus and the bridge and the lead vocals itself, it gets more therapeutic in a way, as in like it's more enjoyable the more you listen to it continuously over and over again. And like what Richard, I have to give Richard a lot of credit here, because he mentioned on the Resident Evil soundtrack from the 2002 film, because you know me, I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. So when I first heard that song was in the soundtrack, I'm like, yep, I'm sold right away. I fucking love it. But My Plague is a really great track for what it is. I wish the song would be played live a little bit more, because I feel like especially with the chorus, everyone can just sing the chorus and just like have a good time. And it's just one of the more catchy and probably one of the most underutilized songs on the album, in my personal opinion.
I agree.
Yeah, I think My Plague, to follow up the first two actual tracks with the whole sound of the band here, doesn't feel out of place whatsoever. But I feel with My Plague still being one of the most popular tracks in Slipknot's history, and to get the band a lot of attention from this track, and also Left Behind. This was really, really good of a song for what it is, but we can definitely embrace some more onto the more versatile expression and just such a raw performance of Corey as a vocalist. So My Plague is, to me, one of those beginnings where you could hear a bit of a change of pace and sound for the band, but with this being obviously Slipknot at their heaviest, I feel that there is more to do so in a different side of sound, because the first album there was just less of the melody and more onto that raw, heavier sound. But with Iowa, I feel that a song like this, it is one of those early beginnings where you would discover Slipknot in a bit of a different formula. So My Plague, one of the favorites for me on the record. So right after My Plague, we're going to go right back into some more of the evil territory on the song of Everything Ends. And apparently Chris Fenn was involved in the writing process as much as Tyler with the lyrics, as far as I could guess. But I think with the whole mood that this track brings, Everything Ends, to me, is one of those songs that can get a little bit underrated, and I love how non-stop violent it sounds. It just brings in such a dramatic performance. Corey's vocals all the way through, especially onto his growls and everything else in the background. It was some of the best ever arranges of Slipknot songwriting. I love Everything Ends because it sounds completely destructive. It really really presents another one of the highlights of the entire record, in my opinion, with everything in its path. Everything Ends, to me, is one of the songs that needs to be discovered more and talked about more. You could hear the very low atmospheric vibe, especially you can hear a bit more of the cleans on Corey vocally, but then you could really hear so much package of the instrumentation all the way through that is just something on a bit of a similar vein, like onto People Equal Shit, but I love Everything Ends, and it's one of my other highlights on the record musically as well as instrumentally.
Right. Everything Ends for me. I mean, it has like some softer parts, but also is predominantly heavy, especially like the intro lyrics is with Corey saying, "You are wrong, fucked, and overrated. I think I'm gonna be sick. It's your fault. This is the end of everything. You are the end of everything. I haven't slept since I woke up and found out my whole life was a lie, motherfucker." Just some really deep lyrics, and also it's very evil sounding. Just like the whole band's like on fire right here. It's a very mid-paced song, and it's also in my opinion, one of the most underrated Slipknot songs.
Everything Ends, to me, it starts off as this really slow pattern of, slow percussion and the guitar build up. Just when you hear that guitar, it's definitely Slipknot, as it brings like the chord progression and like the samples and the drums kicks from Joey Jordison start to perform. You can easily detect that Everything Ends is more of it's kind of like in the same vein of My Plague, but it's not as slow, but it does have a nice slow build up tempo, especially with the bridge part from the guitars and from like the bass and everything else from a perspective point of view. But I feel like Everything Ends is one of the more prima dominant songs on the album, not from a lyrical standpoint from Corey Taylor, as I feel like the later half of Iowa, which will continue on according to this review, but I feel like Everything Ends to me is one of the most underrated, underlooked, and I guess you can say, I might get crucified for this, but I don't care. I feel like it's one of the most underappreciated songs on the entire album, as I feel like not many people who like Slipknot knows that song that is such a rhythmic anthem. Like, it's a song that I feel like it could be like someone's anthem. Like, if you were to tell me like what's your favorite Slipknot song and someone says Everything Ends, you're like, wow, why'd you choose that song in comparison to like Disasterpiece or 515, for instance. But Everything Ends, to me, an underrated track, but I feel like it's not the best song on the album, but I feel like it's one of the most standout and memorable tracks on Iowa.
Yeah, I agree. And also that guitar tone on this whole album is great, period.
It is.
Really, really good points there, guys. And you can express yourself with whatever you want to say with your opinions, but I would be maybe involved with other people who are fans of Slipknot, and maybe they would not really talk about Everything Ends as much as some of the other highlights on the record, but Everything Ends is one of the songs that needs to be more loved and appreciated, to talk about as very frequently. So right after Everything Ends, we go to one of the other masterpieces of the record, the Heretic Anthem, which lyrically is basically about the music industry, and Corey perfectly describes the whole thing right from the start to the finish. And it's just one of those expressions that there were other bands, not only in metal, but in rock, well as any band, that they could be targeted in the wrong way, involving some mistreatment, without the bands as a whole doing a lot more creative freedom. And the music industry, as very complex as it is, the Heretic Anthem lyrically is basically, just as it says, it's just a fuck you to the whole thing. I mean, other bands have done that previously, but instrumental wise, the Heretic Anthem, involving the writing credit of Paul Gray and Joey Jordison, this song is monstrous. A monstrous sound of instrumentation, so much energy, with another really great standout chorus. It's just some of these earth-shattering, very aesthetic sounding numbers. And instrumental wise, there's just so much going on. A lot of these brilliant guitar riffs all the way onto the track, and the sheer brutality, especially on the violent drumming from Joey Jordison with his own fast double pace, pedaling action, and the whole ballistic approach to this. The Heretic anthem is always one of the other classic examples why Iowa, to me, is just as a relevant statement of a record. But songs like this, the Heretic anthem, is just some of Slipknot's very best.
Right. Heretic Anthem is probably my all-time favorite Slipknot song, just right from like the countdown, and then when the guitars and drums come in, and then the band just going full force. You could definitely tell that the band just really just giving it all, and just like the guitar playing and just like the vocals, like that chorus is just so catchy. If you're 555, then I'm 666. What's it like to be a heretic? Just a fucking sick song, and especially that little break in the bridge where Joey Jordison does that little double bass, and then it just, especially that whole bridge part where just the whole band just goes on fire. It's just fucking sick, and especially like the ending, and when Corey just belts out that long yell, it's just it gives me chills every time. And I remember seeing like there's still the live videos from like Conan O'Brien 2001, like that whole band was on fire. And an interesting thought, interesting note, Jay Weinberg, who would eventually beat their current drummer, was actually watching them at the time when he was 11 years old with his dad. So that was pretty interesting to see him, and eventually would become the new drummer for Slipknot many years later.
The Heretic anthem. Fun little fact about myself. It was actually the very first Slipknot song I've ever heard before I even knew who Slipknot even was to begin with. The Heretic anthem to me is top 5 favorite songs on the album on Iowa of all time. I love the aggressiveness. I love the technicality. I love the craftsmanship displayed on this song, because it really feels like Corey Taylor has unleashed his primal fury, where he is just this behemoth of a vocalist, just unleashing his vicious war cry vocals, where it feels like it's raspy, it's throaty. You feel like he's unleashing a demon outside of his own tunnel throat, and his chord progression is just completely unsophisticated in such a way. But everything else from the drumming, I got to say that this is Joey Jordison's best drum fills on the entire album, next to People Equal Shit. And for that reason, I feel like his Joey Jordison's drumming on this song as a whole, it is catchy, it's groovy, it's technical. It also feels like it has this thrash metal, industrial part of influence. And also, I might get a little bit hate for this too, but I feel like there's a little bit of a black metal tendency within his drum pattern on the Heretic anthem, because if you listen to the snare tone, just a little bit of a snare tone, you can easily tell it sounds raw, it sounds frosty. It feels like it's contemporary in such a way. And I feel like the Heretic anthem is one of the best songs from Slipknot as a whole, probably my top 5 songs ever written from the band, and a huge fan favorite as well. So I have to give credit where credit is due. The Heretic anthem is a huge historical landmark in the band's career, saying that, the music industry can go fuck itself after all the shit, bands have been going through. And this song is a great representation that if you're in a band and if you're struggling to find a label and if you can't do anything yourself, listen to this song. The lyrics will absolutely resonate with you. The Heretic anthem, top 5 favorite songs from Slipknot, top 5 favorite on Iowa, hands down.
Such a fantastic, brilliant presentation of Iowa. And we are onto the halfway point of the record, where they decide to take things down, take things into something really moody and very atmospheric sounding on the re-recording of the track Gently, which, by comparing it to the Mayfield Kill Repeat version, which I actually enjoy quite a lot, this version is a whole other level for the band. And I love this very gentle, syncopated bass lines and gentle cymbal taps, especially hearing these turntable sampling effects in the background, and especially the slow ascending build-up. The build-up on this track just paces itself so wonderfully. This track is always another one of their masterpieces, in my opinion. You can really feel so much of the tension and the pressure that this track really brings up to the max that the Mayfeed Kill Repeat version does not. I mean, I love the acoustic introduction on the Mayfeed Kill Repeat demo version, but Gently, the way this sounds, Paul's thick, brilliant bass lines, his sound was fresh, and the percussive building up sound, and especially the gentle, that word I say, sound of Corey vocally, his voice with just that effect and the rumbling bass in the background and the volume switches immediately from gentle to completely loud and dramatic, and the tempo change to make something like on a thrashy kind of sound on the last halfway point of the song is just perfect. Everything on this track works so strongly. It doesn't sound rushed. It doesn't sound dragged on whatsoever. And at almost 5 minutes of its entirety, to follow up such a madness that was the Heretic anthem, the previous song, to change things down into something like this. I love this version of Gently so much, and it's another one of my favorites. And personally, I would maybe select this track as one of the best, I guess, progressive-ish, switchable, moody kind of sounds on the album than what the band did on My Plague. I love My Plague, but I find Gently sometimes to have a bit more of like a connection fulfillment with me.
Right. Gently for me, compared to the Mayfeed Kill Repeat version, which I thought was a pretty solid, but I feel like the Iowa version of Gently is just a lot more, just sounds more creepy and evil sounding thing, especially just from the cymbal taps and that bass line from Paul, may he rest in peace. And this like the one of the few moments you actually hear Paul on the record, and the bass tone on Iowa just sounds really great, especially with the last song, which we'll get into too. But I feel like it definitely is the part where it just slows down a little bit, and it has just a lot of creepiness, especially in the guitars. And then when Corey does his vocals, it just sounds creepy, and then it starts to pick up, and I just love, especially near the end, it just speeds up again with the tempo change. And it's kind of interesting because Slipknot does not play the click tracks, so especially from live to studio, it definitely has variations of parts where they speed up and slow down. So I just think Gently for me is another great song. Whether you prefer the Mayfeed Kill Repeat version or the Iowa version, both of them are pretty unique in their own ways.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that statement. Both the Mayfeed Kill Repeat version of Gently and the Iowa version of Gently have their own significant ways in terms of the musical style and its components. But I feel like the Iowa version is a lot more coherent. It's a lot more dark, and it's like on the previous tracks before. Gently is a song that I don't usually listen to as often when I'm listening to the full album, but I like how slow and methodical it sounds, because they're taking the heaviness level just a little bit down. It's not too watered, it's not too overwhelming. This song is kind of like a rejuvenated energy where they feel like, okay, time to give the aggressive vocals a break, the blast beats and the guitars and the drums and everything else. But Gently is a song I feel like it's not discussed often in the Slipknot community. I mean, probably for a lot of people, but for people who are diehard fans like all of us are, I don't feel like Gently is a song that doesn't get enough satisfaction out of the album, because this is a song where I feel like it shows a little bit of experimentation vibe, where it kind of gives like this this new metal aesthetic, which I hate saying that Slipknot is a new metal. They're a metal band, but they have new metal influences in their songwriting. But I think Gently, to me personally, is a song that if you like a song that's slow and methodical and like mid-pace driven, this song is perfectly for you. Personally, this song is not as bad. It's something that I would listen to over time, but it's a really unique track and probably one of the most original on Iowa.
I really like that on later songwriting duties, especially where they go into so much more variety and something very switchable after this, where they go into different ways, like with Volume 3 to All Hope Is Gone and onwards. I find Gently to have its own fulfillment, as that the band were beginning to build in some more of the variety and the experimentalism. I mean, I find when I listen to some of the latest Slipknot stuff, like We Are Not Your Kind, for example, that album arguably is like their most experimental yet. But I do think where with a song like Gently, they would find in a lot of different ideas. And I really think that Gently is a great example where you could really expand instead of just creating so many of these other songs with a bit of a similar vein towards each other. But I think that Gently is maybe one of the songs on the record that has the most variety. Right after that song, we go into the first single to be released for the album, Left Behind. Now, Left Behind, this track is just such a brilliant example where everything sounds so tight and there's so much power into this song. Corey's vocals, again, while he was actually going through, I think it was laryngitis at the time, recording some of the tracks on the record, I think his vocals on here were just some powerful stuff. And you can really feel the non-stop intensity surrounding this track. And the particular song itself, instrumentally, I love that it's just a direct response and like just a big, massive wall of sound attention. But I find this to be another one of their most standout numbers on the record. And as I've been looking this up, apparently the original title of the song was called Lust Disease, which I never really expected to really think of something like this. And apparently, lyrics-wise, this was through Corey's experience when he was homeless and living under a bridge in his hometown of Des Moines, Iowa. And I find, while Taylor was going through so much difficulty in his life, I could really think that the way he pictures himself in such a disarray and a distraught sense of emotion on tough times like that, involving other things as well, like depression, left behind, especially emotionally for Corey, it's just some of his absolute best. And instrumental wise, very, very tight, tough stuff, and such a really good, prolific number as a whole.
Right. Left Behind is a really good song. Like you said, first single from Iowa. Well, it just starts off with a good guitar lick and then just the drums and percussion. Really mid-paced number. Especially I love the chorus is like, we all got left behind, we let it all slip away. And especially I love how it just ends just with Corey just screaming, and then it just ends just really, like the ending just sounds really creepy with the way Corey just says, we let it all slip away, just really quietly. It gives you goosebumps when you hear it.
Left Behind, I remember seeing the music video for that song in particular, and I thought it was really well done during its time because the song came out almost 20 years ago, believe it or not. Left Behind, yeah, exactly. Left Behind to me is one of those songs I feel like it is the most diverse and probably the most unique song on the album, because I feel like they still have the aggressiveness and the heaviness of the previous songs that we talked about, but Left Behind, to me, I feel like this is one of the better performances vocally for Corey Taylor, especially the spoken word signature style when he says, "We let it all slip away." Like, you can feel like it's this haunting, this atmospheric, and this dreadful and decrepit style of Corey that we never really heard before. I mean, of course, when you hear the self-titled, he was trying to find his sound and his signature, but on Left Behind, for instance, you can tell by the amount of detail and creativity that the band members were able to create this song. This song would be like a perfect like B-rated movie or like a horror flick, because when he says, I ignore you as I close my eyes, we let it all slip away, I can torch you, we all got left behind. I feel like that song is a representation. They're like saying that Corey has been through so much shit, you know, mentally, physically, and sonically speaking. This song is probably one of the most mature and probably one of the most astonishing songs on the record, I personally think. So I feel like, personally, Left Behind is a song that I feel like, again, like I said before with Gently, it's an underrated song that more people need to listen to, especially if you're getting to Slipknot. This is a great introduction to the band.
I could definitely really feel the essence of what the vibe of the song really was every time I hear it. And like when you mentioned the music video, I think it paints such a really eerie imagery. Especially, I have loved seeing the band just in action right from the start onto the music video, especially onto the thunder and the rain. It just has a grim look to it. And I find with the music video on Left Behind to be absolutely one of the best music videos because of imagery and presentation. So Left Behind, for most Slipknot fans, everyone knows about it. Everyone knows about how incredible this song is, especially by the time when the album came out. This is just so much of a direct and a great example of Slipknot at one of their best hits. So after Left Behind, we're going to go into some of the later tracks that does take things with what I think in a bit of like more of the underrated spectrum. Like on Everything Ends, we go into The Shape. Now, The Shape to me is a really interesting number because I find that the way this sound of the track really brings into the mixture and the combination of so much of its intensity. The Shape does have something really, really good, as well as with the vocal performances go. You could feel that Corey's vocals on here, as in so more of the tension and quiet whisper sounds, and just the chorus explodes with so much terror surrounding this track. I find The Shape to really follow the rest of the tonality of the album so much better, if not as ever, like the first half of the record. I think the first half of Iowa was just perfection for what it is. But I think the rest of Iowa, personally, after Left Behind, some tracks like this, again, like Everything Ends, definitely deserves so much more of the attention span. But I love how, again, violent it really becomes. And again, so much of the sound of the band, they were working so hard on something like this. And The Shape, to me, is another underrated gem on the record.
Right. Like I agree. The Shape, one of the most underrated Slipknot songs. And I would love to see like Slipknot do like some bring this song back as like some underrated songs. Like I just love how it just has that little build up with the little guitar and then the the little cymbals things, and then just it all explodes, and then it just goes into a good bass line with drums, and it just kind of like just goes in and out with some like softer parts, and then just some heavy parts, and it just really just flows all really well and naturally and organically.
I feel like as I listen to the second half of Iowa, The Shape is one of those songs I feel like we all could definitely agree is one of the most underrated tracks on the entire album. And I feel like the suspension of the track is very surreal in such a way where everything about from the guitar tone to the tonality of the song is just so unadulterated. It just feels like this song is bringing out all the organicness and the growth and the maturity side of things for every member utilizing their own instrumentation part. It feels like it's an album that it continues to build like some momentum. Like it's not like as intense, but it does have a little bit of intensity factor. But I feel like The Shape is one of those songs I feel like I wish the song would get more replay value and also be an instant live fan favorite, because this song here is kind of like a mixture of technicality, a little bit of the industrialized arrangements from the soundscapes of the song, and I feel like The Shape is a song I feel like it brings all these characteristics to life to the point where it feels like you're listening to a complete different band. Like it's still Slipknot without a doubt, but I feel like The Shape is one of the most creative aspects on the record itself.
Well said.
Another number that for me definitely has to get so much more of the attention than just thinking about the obvious numbers on the record, because I think The Shape has so much grit, so much virtuoso driven, and I really like that The Shape does have a separate craft onto its own, and I really do think that it's following up Left Behind in a different way, but I think it follows the sound from Left Behind into this very, very well. So right after the song of The Shape, we're going to go into the shortest track on the record, which is I Am Hated. Now, out of all of these songs, this song is my personal least favorite. The way I see this track, it's kind of like their similarity take on Spit It Out Part 2, but I find that the vocals on a bit of like the rappy vocal style from Corey to be really, really good. And the arrangement wise is all here right onto the beginning, and with something less on a darker presence on a song like the ones previously. But I think I Am Hated is a pretty good number for what it is, though it doesn't really take away the adrenaline rush and the whole capacity of my fulfillment on Iowa entirely. But I think that I Am Hated is one of those songs that I still think it is a decent track, but it doesn't, really have an absorbing feeling like I have with most of the tracks. But I think it's just one of those songs that is like it feels like it's, I guess, filler, I guess I would say in my eyes, but it's just I guess passable for what it is, but I still think it's all right.
I Am Hated is a really sick song. It's just like that opening riff, that it just almost sounds like a fucking death metal riff if you ever hear it. And it's just, it also has that kind of like that whole new metalness with Corey does, sort of like the rappiness, because of course around that time's like first album and a bit of Iowa has that little hip hop thing to it. But Corey does that little bit of rap in there. But I Am Hated, I think, is a good song, and this song was, of course, featured in the movie Rollerball, and which actually Slipknot made a little cameo in that movie, which is, if you ever haven't seen that movie, you should. I just only watch it just for that part with Slipknot. But overall, I Am Hated, another underrated song similar to The Shape.
I Am Hated is one of those songs either you like or you don't appreciate the beauty in its nature for its worth. And also, this is also one of the shortest songs on the album if you exclude the intro 515. But I Am Hated is one of the shortest songs on the secondary half of this album. And I do agree with Richard's statement as well too. Like you can definitely hear a little bit of his like the hip hop, stylistic arrangements from his vocals, especially where he says, "We are the answer, the only answer." Like I feel like that kind of would take like a new metal approach to the song and just how it builds up its own foundation of its song. I feel like this song can be a little bit repetitive at times. Not saying it's overly repetitive, but there's a point to feel like the more you listen to it, you feel like it's one of those songs like you just don't want to go back into. And it's kind of a shame too, because I Am Hated is also a really great song for what it is. So I think for a song like I Am Hated, not one of my personal favorites, but I feel like it's an average track at its best, I feel like.
Right. So after our thoughts on I Am Hated, by obviously choosing the rap metal vein Slipknot track in particular, I would personally have to connect with Spit It Out as much, if not better, as the connected pick than I Am Hated. While Spit It Out being the single from the first record, it's more memorable. That's what's I think missing a little bit on I Am Hated. So with that being said, I Am Hated is a song that I would still like to listen to, but doesn't really follow the rest of the record in like a top quality amount. But I think it's just a decent number. So after I Am Hated, we're going to go into Skin Ticket. And Skin Ticket, one of these other really atmospheric and haunting soundscaping growing tracks in Slipknot's history. Skin Ticket, really great drumming patterns and the theatrical, horrifying experience of a percussion-driven sound. And again, onto the lower tunage of guitar sounds, Skin Ticket marks Slipknot at one of their darkest since like Scissors, for example, and Corey's vocals. I love that it builds in a bit of like that chorusy, flangy kind of effect on his voice. And you could hear so much going on in its simplicity. And while it's not like a really progressive, switchable number, because the pacing on this song, like onto Gently, it's just working out as well. Skin Ticket, one of my other high favorites on the record. You could immediately hear and syncopate everything in the whole vibe from start to finish. Just some really great brutal breakdown sections and Corey shredding his voice out all on here is, to me, one of the best numbers on Iowa, from almost 7 minutes in some kind of like this sample driven industrial kind of mark, and just the whole thing. I could really describe something much more about Skin Ticket, but to me, this is something as really ballistic, but something just so unsettling like Scissors. But I love Skin Ticket, so there's nothing much I could personally say about it other than I think it follows so much well than the previous track of I Am Hated. With Skin Ticket, to me, one of their other masterpieces on Iowa.
Skin Ticket for me, kind of similar to a little bit of Gently. It's just a very creepy sounding song, just in terms of like the guitar tone, and just like when Corey does his like weird vocals, like zero is nothing but zero. Come see my cave built in my grave. Ugh, it just gives me chills chills when I hear this song. It's another great Slipknot song, another underrated one. I guess feel like the second half of Iowa, in my opinion, has some of the most underrated gems.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you guys as well too. Skin Ticket is one of my personal favorites on the album, specifically for its darker, tone and the way they utilize the almost like industrial gothic aspects of the song. You can definitely tell that this song is basically just kind of like we are Gently Part 2, but we're not really Gently Part 2. This is its own identity, and I feel like Skin Ticket is one of those tracks where I feel like the more I listen to it, the better of each listen I got to, because it contains such brilliancy and the atmosphere and the tone and this unsettling moods of like, this is the kind of a song I feel like I will just like lit my room dark and light some candles because of how dark during this song was its time, because it actually aged pretty well from a production standpoint of view. So I do wish Skin Ticket, again, like we talked about with Gently and I Am Hated and others, this song would definitely be a great like closing track for a song. If they were ever to go back and revisit to play some of the songs from Iowa, Skin Ticket would definitely be in the top category. I would love to see people talk more about frequently, because I feel like Skin Ticket is probably one of the most experimental songs on the album for sure.
I think it's one of those songs as well that they don't really play it live as much, which
it's played live in 2016.
That's right.
Was that the last time they've ever played it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have first heard a live version of Skin Ticket from their live album in 2005, but I think Skin Ticket as a song really needs to be played, I guess, frequently with the cycle of Iowa, but I think this is another highlight on the record because it just gives such a brilliant and phenomenal example with just the whole presence of Iowa to begin with, like the first half of the record. So right after Skin Ticket, we're going to go into New Abortion. New Abortion. Musically, for me, with just the variety of it, the blasting once again on Joey, and such a really dirgy, murky, and fucking filthy as hell monster of a track. New Abortion is where it's at. I find that this type of track, especially with its lyrical content, just has something really, really dirty about it. It's just something grim and grotesque. New Abortion, one of the really brilliant tracks of Iowa that perfectly sums up this musicianship on Iowa. Is just out of this world. I love everything on the first record, but I find something on Iowa to have its most consistent path, like I said earlier on in the video. But New Abortion, something really, really out there. One of my other amazing favorites on the record, and I personally find that this is another one that needs to get more playable ability, especially if they will play it live. I mean, when I had seen them live last time around, they did play New Abortion, which I was not expecting whatsoever. And it's just a great song all around. And I find that New Abortion is one of the songs that follows the theme and the intensity so much better than with tracks like I Am Hated, in my opinion. So New Abortion, something earth crushing, and it's just such a really grim number.
Right. New Abortion, I just love how it just starts off with the little guitars, and then the rest of the band just comes right in and just hits you at 1,000,000 miles per hour. That it gets you banging your head, and then when Corey unleashes the monstrous scream, it just the whole band just like is on fire with this song, and especially like the vocals, especially like in the bridge when Corey does like his little like rap parts, like what do you need to see? You feel the impact. Gotta retract. Everybody get back. What is this? It's just like really catchy, and especially love like the end thing with like you can't take your soul away from me, and then him screaming like fuck you, and it just ends everything just all in a chaotic manner.
I'm so jealous of Greg right now that he saw New Abortion live and we don't, because sometimes I blame UK crowds compared to the US crowds, because our US crowds is nothing compared to like Wacken Standard Point, but that's besides the point.
And like Europe's like fuck you, fuck US, right?
How come the US don't get shit tours? We do have good tours, we just don't get enough good value. But anyway, right? Someone gets my language here. Anyway, New Abortion. Unlike the Heretic anthem and the People Equal Shit, New Abortion is also one of the heaviest songs on the album for a good matter. From the heaviest standpoint to the whole like like unleashing the rap metal hip hop aesthetics vocals from Corey Taylor. I feel like he really truly shined his vocals on that song in particular, because he can go from like being as fast, he can go as mid-pace, he can slow it down top a notch, he can be as pummeling and polarizing in such a way. And I feel like within the, the guitars, the drums, the bass, the samples, and the atmosphere being so dark and gritty and ministering sounding, this song is also, I feel like, another underrated gem in my personal opinion, because again, for like the millionth time, New Abortion needs to be rediscovered. It needs to have replay value. And I truly feel that New Abortion is probably one of the best tracks on the secondary half of the album. And I feel like this song, if you like the heaviness and the dark tone of previous songs from Iowa, then New Abortion would definitely be one of those songs. Can also be a great introduction to new listener as well too, because it has heaviness, it has darkness, it has technicality, it has some progressive parts, it's got rap metal, it's got industrial, thrash, death. I can go on forever and ever, but New Abortion to me is probably one of the most underlooked and most underrated songs in the entire album of Iowa and the whole record itself. I feel like it's just a flawless song with no complaints whatsoever.
Just something as massive, maddening, and just an eruption of a song. And it makes me think of People Equal Shit in a similarity vein. But just like People Equal Shit, New Abortion is like out of boundaries. It's just, nothing too safe or nothing free at all. It's just some of the grimiest songs Slipknot had ever created. So right after New Abortion, we're going to go into Metabolic. Now, Metabolic, I really like this track. And I find with the sound of the drums and the fruition of the riffs from Mick and Jim, they build in so much chemistry together. The snare drum on this song smacks right at you. It's just like a smack in the face. And the whole nature of this track, something like On the Shape in a way, where they expand in different passages along the way. But I really find that Metabolic is one of those other songs that has so much action. It's pummeling, it's aggressive, and this was, for me, really, really good to follow up New Abortion, because New Abortion was just something really like a doomy, slower edge kind of song, whereas with Metabolic, it is faster, it's obviously melancholic, but this was a really good song on following up such an intensifying number.
Metabolic is another good song. It starts off with like a little scratching from Sid, and it just really, in my opinion, showcases how good Joey Jordison was. Especially the little double bass that he does is just it just gives you goosebumps, and just a very mid-paced number. And I just love like Corey's vocals here. It just sounds really aggressive and just really rhythmic a little bit in ways.
Metabolic is almost identical to My Plague in such a way. In terms of like the drumming sequence from Joey Jordison displayed from his counterparts and whatsoever, I feel like this is one of the better songs drumming wise for Joey Jordison, because I feel like this is where he truly shines, you know, his cymbals, his percussion beats, his blast beats as well too. And I feel like the samples and the turntables and the scratches from Sid Wilson, it's just so uniquely well done, and it's remarkable, where I feel like this song is kind of like in the veins of listening to like a Mr. Bungle or like a song that is like experimental, because it does have that heaviness. It's got a little bit of funk. It's got a little bit of rap. It's got a little bit of like a doom territory. This song in particular, I feel like is another great example of like how well crafted Slipknot can truly be, especially for a time when they know that they wanted to create an album that was so dark and unsophisticatedly heavy, and just the way that they utilize the song for this song in particular, it's just completely floored in my personal opinion, because I can never know how a 9-piece band from Des Moines, Iowa can create an album that solidified themselves and shot themselves to the stratosphere for a song like Metabolic, which I feel like the clean vocals from Corey Taylor and everything else from the original 9 members have showcased themselves as saying that, you know, we are Slipknot, we can make an album that is so experimented and dark and emotional, thought-provoking, and very proactive in such a way. So in my personal opinion, Metabolic is a song that it captures the overall essence of its beauty, its nature, and, you know, Corey Taylor being the beast that he is right now. This is where I truly feel like this is one of the songs. I feel like if the title track that we're going to talk about next, if that wasn't in the way, then Metabolic would have been a great closure for what it is. So Metabolic to me is a really damn good song, and probably one of the most impressive on the second half of Iowa.
Really good points. And after the entirety of the album, lengthwise of tracks from 3.5 to mostly over 4 minutes in length, we go into the crescendo of the album, the title track, Iowa, 15 minutes. Now, just something like Scissors, but in a different path. It starts so slow. And comparing it to Killers Are Quiet from Mayfield Kill Repeat, that was on a shorter length, obviously. But this structure is pretty much the same, like on that track. But I absolutely find the title track to solidify and finish Iowa in such a wonderful way. You hear these same few bass notes on repeat non-stop, and you hear some of the eerie and picture capturing imagery, the percussion beats, the simplicity of it, the gentle cymbal hits, building up more and more, amplifying, ascending more volume, and then the eruption of the breakdown-esque mark of music just sets the tone. This is, without question, obviously one of the absolute very darkest tracks that Slipknot had ever executed. And apparently, whilst Corey was recording his vocals, as I was looking the whole thing up, he was naked and he was slicing himself with a broken piece of glass, and you can hear some raw yet powerful stuff. And if I may refer to some quotes from Wikipedia, according to Corey Taylor, and I quote, "He was completely naked, vomiting all over himself and cutting himself with broken glass." And he says, that's where the best stuff comes from. You've got to break yourself down before you can build something great. And that kind of explanation was perfect, because this is a song with less experimentalism and less energy, but to slow things right down, something like on a Neurosis kind of vein, like on something on the album Through Silver and Blood. This is a song with so much incredible raw performances, and the guitars drone the simple basic notes over and over and over again. And vocal wise on this track, and as well as the whole album, this is Corey's best album vocally out of all the ones that he had recorded, because while Corey was going through so much disturbing, very grim personal stuff, the way he screams, he shrieks, he sounds so violently all the way through Iowa to finish off this album was perfect. It's a perfect closing track to finish off the album, and it does not feel like it's a dragging on song, because with that kind of pace, it just finishes without making you think that it goes on too long, because it just whizzes by every time you hear it. So Iowa, like Scissors, has an identity of its own, and I love it for that. So you can hear so much going on the record because of its simplicity and the repetition that does not take things away negatively. And I find Iowa to perfectly finish the album in such a grim and disgusting note.
Right. Iowa for me is, I think I compare it to like the same vein of Scissors, but it's more creepy. And this song was actually a reworking of the song Killers Are Quiet from Mate Feed Kill Repeat. And I remember hearing a video about Corey talking about it. It's about playing with dead things. And this song just, like I said, I just remember hearing Corey talking about like getting naked and like cutting himself. And I remember there's actually like some clips online of like them recording in Iowa, and I don't even want to imagine that. That would just give you a haunting. It just like, even just cutting himself, you could definitely feel the pain that he is experiencing when recording it. And this song just starts off just with samples, and then kind of similar to the vein of Gently. This is one of the moments you actually hear Paul on the bass, and then the percussion comes in, and then the song eventually just gets heavy. And I love how just like Corey just screaming, "I will kill you to love you." And there's especially interesting hidden message after like sort of like the verses finish and then the guitars fade out, and then Corey's like heard like screaming a bunch of things, and then there's like that weird gibberish, but then it's actually a sample played by Craig Jones. When it's played backwards, it's actually heard saying "Don't look at me." And there's actually, well, I know they've only did it very rarely live, especially in 9.0 live, they would shorten it. But then for the 15-year anniversary in 2016, they've actually played the whole song, but they actually extended it so it's like 20 minutes long, which is fucking nuts. And I especially love how, especially after the verses, guitars fade out, and it sort of like ends how it begins with sort of like the bass line and the percussion, and then the guitars come back in. And then I love how just the way Corey just finishes it off by saying "I will kill you to love you," and then I feel like everything just ends, no pun intended, just ends right there, and then it gets back in sync, and then one by one the band just starts playing, and then being Paul like the last one to stop. And I just love that last bass line. I just wish like Paul Gray, especially with like even from, you hear a little bit with the self-titled, but especially with like Volume 3 and All Hope Is Gone, I kind of wish the bass was heard more. But I think Iowa is pretty much sums up what the whole album is. The song itself just end everything, just 15 minutes in, it just ends everything. And I think it's a great representation of the album and just ends everything all on a high note.
The title track, Iowa, is probably the most grotesque, disturbing, and probably the most graphic song on the entire album. Not because of the imagery and the stories of the past that Corey Taylor has been through as a person with, vomiting and tormenting himself and, trying to injure his own body because he couldn't take the pain anymore. When I first heard this song, it kind of reminded me of Daddy from Korn because of how disturbing that song in particular was, because I can relate to Jonathan Davis and Corey Taylor being two of my favorite vocalists growing up as a kid. But I feel like Corey Taylor's version, or his take on this song in particular, is just like you feel sorry for him. You want to give all your sympathy. You want to give him like your extensive wishes and like your strength and your blood and your efforts to Corey Taylor, because during the time when this album was made, we even knew who the fuck Slipknot was until the self-titled was released back in 1999. And for the title track for Iowa, for being a 15-minute song of depravity and suspense and eerie and claustrophobia and feeling like this sense of fright and terror and shivering down your spine, because I never heard a song like this where it captures such horrifying, imageries of Corey Taylor, hearing him do this over the samples. And I agree with Richard on the other hand too, like the bass line part from Paul Gray, may he rest in peace. It creates this unsettling, this moody, lurky, and also this unsophisticated way of just building the song repeatedly over and over, of just like silence, and you feel like it's over. But when you get into the other half of Iowa, man, talk about a song that is just so hard to swallow, hard to digest. It makes you want to vomit your own brains out just to hear something like this. It's just so it's so magnificently crafted, but it's also pretty fucked up in such a way. Not saying it's bad, but like when you listen to the lyrics, when you listen to the album's content and its lyrical imagery and the interviews and everything about this album, it is just so chaotically driven start to finish. And I feel like with Iowa, the title track specifically, this does remind me a lot of Scissors in such a way, but this one is just 10 times the intensity, 10 times the darkness and the graphic content. It feels like I'm playing a violent video game where you have to make an unconscious decision of like killing your loved one or sacrifice yourself so the other one lives. That's kind of like how I feel about Iowa as a whole. So overall, Iowa, the title track as a whole, I feel like it is probably the most mind-blowing, almost controversial, and very unsettling songs they've ever done. And especially for a closing track, this is going to be in the books as probably one of the most iconic, memorable, and well-structured songs they've ever done.
You made a really good point there by comparing this to Korn's Daddy, which is one of those songs that I would say is one of the most disturbing that I've ever heard, because the way Jonathan Davis was going through in the studio doing that song in such a really personal and tear-shattering way, I find Iowa to have such a really good example of something like this. So to begin the album on 515 on such an emotionally drained note, and then finishing the album in that same capacity, this is where Slipknot were at their best in the writing ability, the production. Again, something similar like on a raw vibe on the first record, but this takes it to something like a triumphant way, and no wonder that many Slipknot fans cite this as their very best album. So the consistency, the arrangements, the songwriting, and the production. The production done by Ross Robinson, which we'll get to here, because as much as I love his production on the first album, his work on this record, so dedicated. And he had to fight through a fractured back during the making of this, after spending 1 day in hospital. And he had to work all the way through with the album's production whilst in pain, because he went through a dirt bike accident before. And that really shows the dedication, because Iowa is torturous, it's vicious, it's just destructive, it's apocalyptic, and it's just some of the most heaviest shit I've ever heard when it comes to discovering a metal band. And as much as I was discovering bands at the time that I was getting into metal and music entirely as well, with something like Iowa, Slipknot at this peak were something that I was not expecting to hear something on a record like this. So much respect to Ross Robinson for the top-notch production, and Andy Wallace with the mixing. Andy Wallace being another household name for production and mixing. He worked with many other bands, including Guns N' Roses, to Rage Against the Machine, Sepultura, to others like Slayer, The Cult, Bruce Springsteen, Paul McCartney, to Sonic Youth, etc. A household name, as I've said. But Ross Robinson's production really adds so much flavor, so much chemistry that he had done previously with the self-titled. But I love his style of production on this one probably the most when he used to work with the band.
Yeah, I agree. Like Ross Robinson, like considered like the new metal producer, like produced the first couple Corner albums, first 2 Slipknot albums, Deftones, Limp Bizkit, like Sepultura. Like he is definitely a known name, but well known in that whole realm in the mid late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, there's no denying of how much he influenced a lot of these bands throughout the early to late 90s and even to early 2000s. There's no denying that he is one of the best producers in music as a whole. So as Greg says, I agree. I give him so much credit where it's due, especially in a day, because I don't know how a producer can do such a way to make an album of what Slipknot wanted to create this album from an imagery standpoint, lyrical standpoint. So if there's one person that we got to give credit to, it's definitely him, because he made what made this album truly special for every extreme metal fans and for rock music fans as a whole. So I definitely agree wholeheartedly 100% about his contributions and his continuous efforts.
Just some of the best produced metal albums in metal, not just modern metal, but metal entirely. There's just something about the sound, and the mixing from Andy was spectacular on here as well. But I think for best album production wise in metal, Iowa has to be in here, because I love the tones from the first record, but Iowa steps it right up a notch for everything that you would have to hear on a Slipknot album. As much as the band had worked with others like Greg Feidelman to Rick Rubin, Ross Robinson was the man. And, you know, some of my favorite albums of all time were produced by him. As Richard did say, he worked with others like Sepultura to Korn. And as I've mentioned him previously from my debut collab review, Ross Robinson's one of my favorite producers of all time. So all in all, with Iowa to be The second album from Slipknot is very relevant, a huge, frenetic, pioneering statement, and one of the essential albums, and to me, one of the definitions of the new metal genre. And it just never gets out of style, never gets out of touch. And every time I put this on, it just never ceases to amaze me. So with all of these words being said about Iowa, I will have to say that the obvious rating for Iowa, it has to be a 10 out of 10. Just another classic in Slipknot's discography, and most Slipknot fans would cite Iowa as the last of the classics before they went into maturity and switching directions with Volume 3 onwards. But I absolutely admired just the sheer rawness, despite the difficulties making this album, emotionally, mentally, going through a lot of abuse to addictions and so many different troubles along the way. Iowa, if I have to say one final thing about Iowa, this is a gem and a staple of what new metal was all about.
Yeah, I mean, Iowa came out in 2001, which was the peak of new metal, where new metal was pretty much at its peak. But because after 2001, it kind of like dropped off. And I think Iowa still, I agree with you on your rating, Greg. And I pretty much would give it a 10 out of 10 as well. Well, it's still their best album to date, and the 28th will be the 20 years since this album has dropped. And one thing I would love to see is them doing like a tour. They played the whole album from start to finish. That would make my entire life. And coincidentally, the 28th in Atlanta, Corey Taylor is actually going to be at a convention called Days of the Dead, which I'm going to try to ask him and beg him, please, can we get an Iowa album playthrough tour, or at least play some like the rare some songs from Iowa that doesn't been played live, like Skin Ticket, New Abortion, Metabolic, The Shape. I would love to see that happen.
As I previously said before we got into the recording process, Iowa is one of the albums that got me into extreme metal. If it wasn't for that album, I would not be standing with you guys talking to you about music as a whole, because Slipknot was a huge gateway band for me personally, alongside with System of a Down, Fear Factory, Typo Negative, Nine Inch Nails, Tool. I mean, all the essential bands that helped me expand my musical broadened taste has been so appreciated and blissful and grateful. And I'm very, internally blessed to have a band like Slipknot who not only innovated the way that they created for its legacy, but of course, a lot of people would know that they kind of died with Slipknot after Iowa, which is understandable. I understand that bands have to evolve, they have to mature their sound, they have to dive more into expansive territory, but I also think Volume 3 is a good album, not their best, but I give huge respect for the aesthetics and the appeal from the mainstream audiences that they've gained over the years because of the self-titled, because of Iowa. And I give them huge credit for being as like one of the biggest mainstream bands in the 21st century. So Iowa, for me, will always be the best Slipknot album in terms of the lyrical content, the ideology, the artwork, the imagery, the aggressiveness, the technicality, the progression, the craftsmanship. Everything about that album solidified Slipknot as a band, because we never heard a metal band from Des Moines, Iowa that has not one, not two, not three, but 9 members. And to have 9 members in an extreme metal band, well, heavy metal band, you get my drift. But
Yeah.
For the album turning 20 years, it's just amazing, because I was becoming a teenager during that time when Iowa was first releasing. My sister was 5 months old when that album was first released. So Yeah, exactly. So I never got to see Slipknot live during their time, but I have to give them huge credit and huge respect for them for what they've contributed in for metal, because Slipknot's Iowa is the best album of 2001. I mean, yeah, System of a Down Toxicity is my favorite metal album of all time, my favorite band of all time. But Iowa is a damn close second of a favorite album of that year. But with that being said, if I had to give an honest review of Iowa, I'm going to go with you guys right on the mark right now, and I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 masterpiece,
Wow.
absolute quintessential of the album, because you have to understand that, yeah, Slipknot gets a lot of shit for the mainstream because they wear masks, they wear jumpsuits, they were like the Limp Bizkit of heavy metal, which is probably the most terrible analogy I've ever said.
That's like dumb.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And the whole thing with the Mushroom debate. I don't care for Mushroom. I like a couple albums, but I was more of a Slipknot fan than a
I'm like
Mushroom
that
head.
too.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
a 10 out of 10 for Iowa. There's nothing else I can say. Nothing I can say about this album. It really changed who I am as a person. And if if I had not known about Iowa, I have not would have known about heavy metal and its other subgenres. So Iowa by Slipknot, 10 out of 10, an absolute essential, the best Slipknot album forever and always. And I hope to God, Richard, if you tell Corey Taylor that they play a anniversary tour for Iowa and he says yes, I'm buying tickets. I don't give a fuck. I want
Yeah.
to see the album that changed my life as a journalist, as a music fan, and as a Slipknot fan as a whole. So 10 out of 10,
Yeah.
perfect album. Go listen to if you want to get into Slipknot, this is a great introduction.
I agree. Like, well, I love how we all give the same rating. Like, nobody's even disagreeing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's one of those albums where you feel like if you want to get into metal, this is the epitome of new metal. I mean, they had everything that no other band sounded like before. I mean, Korn had the rap style, Limp Bizkit had the rap rock, Hybrid Theory, Linkin Park had like rock and like rap and metal alternative stuff, but nothing compared to what Slipknot was. Slipknot is like an original band from the late 90s because they've been together as a band for like what, 27 years?
Well, I think 26 since they formed in '95.
Yeah, so almost 27 years, which is remarkable. But yeah, 10 out of 10. One of my favorite albums ever made.
Anyway, guys, so with that being said, that is all that we've got to say for the Slipknot album entitled Iowa. And there's going to be, yep.
Oh, before we wrap this up, how about we give our favorite tracks on Iowa to the listeners?
Oh, okay.
I'll go first. I'll go
all right,
first.
so Richard, you go
for
first.
me. Okay, for me, it's Heretic Anthem.
I would have to say for the song to get your attention to get into Slipknot, without a song that's like the heaviest or the softest, I would possibly maybe start with Left Behind. So in terms of my main favorites on Iowa, I'm not going to be biased to pick all of them, but if I have to pick a top 5, I would go with People Equal Shit, Disasterpiece, the Heretic Anthem, Left Behind, and Skin Ticket.
What about your others, Richard? You said Heretic Anthem.
Okay, so if I had to pick other songs, I'd love People Equal Shit and New Abortion.
Oh man, for me personally, it's People Equal Shit, Heretic Anthem, New Abortion, Skin Ticket, and Iowa.
Right, so really good selection of choices, some diversity, but everyone knows about Iowa in its entirety from start to finish. Obviously, just a huge relevant metal statement of of an album. It's just Slipknot's product that any metal fan should at least listen to, whether you are a fan or not. So that pretty much wraps it up for our review with the Iowa album with myself, RichardMetalFan, and SeditionThroughScorns. And speaking of System of a Down, guys, for those that are into these collaborative album reviews, Jake and I are going to be reviewing Toxicity in honor of its 20th anniversary.
You can count me in.
All right, you can be in if you want.
Like,
Sweet.
that's the band that got me into metal. I have to be in there.
Right, so the same three of us are going to be reviewing Toxicity in either the next few weeks or around close to the time of the original Toxicity release. So keep an eye out for that, guys. What's that?
I think it's September 7th was the release date, or September 3rd.
Yeah, it's around September time.
Yeah,
I know it's released right before 9/11.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's really crazy. And Slayer released God Hates Us All at that date as well.
September 4th is the release date.
Right.
Oh,
Excellent.
oh.
So maybe we could review the album a few weeks before or right on the date, whenever you guys are free. So
Well, it's on a Saturday, so it'll work for me.
Yeah, me
Right.
too.
I'll have to find out if I'm free to do that actually, but we'll keep in touch. So anyways, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for watching, and a big thank you to Richard and Jake for participating. Anyways, so thank you guys for watching, and I will keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.
Why you